So today I want to talk about an announcement that has got everyone up in arms that the PMI has bought / merged with / acquired. Yeah. The Agile Alliance. And I wanted to get your take to see if I could find somebody in the world that cared, because I didn't care.
I saw the news and I found it very interesting. So this is quite topical. There's been a plethora of stuff out there from people that are basically saying yay or nay, right? Oh. So we're going to delve into it today.
Oh, I hope you have an opinion, because I have. Well, thank goodness I hit our music.
I don't know.
That was interesting. All right, so here's the article. Agile Alliance joins Project Management Institute, PMI, January 3rd, 2025. So it wasn't that long ago. We don't really ride trends on the podcast that much. And this is the launching point for the rest of the episode.
Exactly.
I feel like I'm going to represent on this episode what most people are saying, which is I could care less. Most people are already, that Agile ship has sailed. I follow many development communities. A lot of developers are anti-Agile.
Yeah.
Because it's been co-opted by modern day management as a tool of control, and they just use the Agile terms, but still do all the PMI, project management, old school type stuff. Just to stay with this for a second, let's look at the article. Agile Alliance joins PMI. It says there's some fluff here about the world leading authority in project management and the people who've taken your money for many, many years to have you, the old PMI, way back in the day when you had a PMP certification, I remember it was a big deal that you had to actually work and prove that you were on those projects to keep your certification. Did that soften over time?
I don't believe so. I don't think it's softened. I think what's happened is there's been a lot of quote-unquote enablement companies that sprung up over time that just say, hey, look, just attend our class and we'll show you how to pass the test. And as far as...
An industry, basically.
Exactly. And as far as making sure that they had the prerequisite hours of experience before applying, you're taking your chances. Are you going to get audited? If you do, but a lot of people just take the chances and roll the dice.
I always thought the PMI certifications were somewhat stringent about auditing your stuff.
They used to be. I think it's relaxed quite a bit over the years, to be honest. I mean, that's what I've seen, at least talking to people as well that are recently minted ones. I used to be part of the mentorship group in the Tampa Bay PMI chapter, just to make sure that we can enable people locally to be able to become PMP certified or CAPM certified. And what I learned is the frequency of audits have gone down for what it's worth.
I'm sure that has something to do with the cost benefit of how much money it takes to actually audit. I don't know. I'm not really trying to make a statement because, again, I don't know if I really care about any of this stuff. Just to read some snippets from the article, as part of the process, the managing director and the board members, I'm assuming the elected board members and whatnot, they all can keep their positions and they join the PMI now. So, yachts for everyone, basically. I don't think there's any yachts even involved in any of this.
So Oprah comes to mind. Yacht for you? You get a yacht, and you get a yacht. No, seriously though, I personally think, and again, this is just my point of view, PMI has been trying to become relevant or stay relevant for quite some time. Right. And this is just the latest thing. It's like they've seen membership not come on as strong at the same pace as in the past, or renewal rates drop substantially. I know personally of several people that have said, not going to pay them anymore. So that I think this kind of makes sense when you think about the easy way into the Agile space. I know they came up with their own certs as well into Agile, but this is like the Agile Alliance or Scrum Alliance are the only two, or Scrum.org too, I guess, right?
Right, yeah.
But the other two are legit bodies that certify people and have a bunch of experts contributing to that, right? So the Agile Alliance, for me, really is all about you go to them to see what events they're putting on, where those events are, and that's pretty much the end of it.
So I did a bit of poking around. We need over on the other side of episode 200. We need to make a slight adjustment to the working agreement, which we're doing on camera without talking about it before the first time. I feel the working agreement needs to be like the company names or organizations need to be fair choice for naming and shaming on the podcast. Whereas individual people. I am not going to use the podcast as a banner for attacking people.
No, that's not what we're here for.
I don't mind saying that, all the people in here, there's a lot of people that are on their board that are trainers that basically make their money off of certifications. Now those people are moving over to PMI, which I'm sure that at some point when they move over to PMI, whatever PMI is doing with certifications, it just makes sense to now I can train over here on the Scrum side of the house, and now I can train on the PMI side of the house, and somewhere those two revenue streams will connect to make a larger revenue stream for all these people that will not be impacted by this. But taking that cynical view aside, I want to read some sentences from this release announcement here, this little marketing thing. It says, modern project delivery demands fluency across a continuum of delivery practices, enabling professionals to choose the right approach for each project. Successful delivery requires a combination of skills and knowledge tailored to specific contexts. So that's what Agile is. It's a delivery practice. Which right there, that sentence, I fundamentally disagree with that sentence. But also, like, all the people attacking Agile, like this, I feel there's a fork in the road now.
Yeah.
Do I want to attack Agile for being like just a cash grab on delivery practices? Or do I believe in it as like a fundamental mindset that you should be running your business off of? Right? That fork in the road is going to, basically, that's what we're going to talk about this whole podcast. Because I want to talk about, we had already planned to talk about why developers are so negative on Agile. And it's difficult to talk about why developers are so negative on Agile without including Scrum, because most developers just have bad experiences all across the board with the, quote, implementation of these delivery practices. But none of that corresponds to any of the principles of the Agile Manifesto. And if you're going to say, like in the Agile Alliance's website, it says like, oh, we're an organization that cropped up because we wanted to promote the Agile principles. So how does merging with the PMI, the vision, the strategy is not clear to me of how that enables, you know what I mean? Like, I feel that they should have spent a lot of time crafting this release announcement to talk about how merging with PMI can enable the strategy of bringing better Agile to a broader audience. That's not what I read here. What I read here, I read as a product manager who says, okay, the market has been re-segmented, where Agile is taking market share away from selling PMI widgets. So now we're going to buy the top organization that we can buy promoting Agile stuff to say, oh, we were Agile all along. These people were wrong the whole time.
I think the point you make is valid. I think part of that is also the PMI really was late to the party when it comes to adopting the Agile ways of working. They were still talking about their 8, 9, or 10, whatever it is nowadays, subsidiary plans and project planning, project management. So they were late to the party. But by doing this, they can now say, we're also Agile. And the other side of the equation that you started off the conversation with, those trainers that are Agile Alliance trainers, or they were before the 3rd of January, could now say, I can certify you and you'd be PMI certified. And it's exactly the same cert that you were getting
much
before.
Much more prestigious.
But it's, yes, exactly. So there's this sense of there's some legitimacy here now, right? Suddenly, because PMI's name is on it. Honestly, there's been a saturation of training providers to be generous, right? People that can say, I have a class you should attend because you'll get certified and it'll be good for you. There's been a lot of people that can do that lately, not just in Americas, but also globally. Mm-hmm. What happened, and I think COVID helped this along as well, is a tremendous drop in the cost of taking certification classes and exams, where you could get, for pennies on a dollar, you could get the same certification from an overseas REP, registered education provider. Yeah. So because of the competition, the trainers are struggling. They have been for a bit to try and stay relevant, try and make sure that they can survive, let alone thrive. Right. And I personally believe that this is why the Agile Network was born, because these trainers are, what can we do? Let's just unite and create a platform where we can do a freemium version. People can get something for free to entice them into joining, and we'll make it easy for them to join. It's $1 a day only, right? Yeah. Less than the cost of a latte.
No, too expensive for me.
Yeah.
Like, if it was like $50 a year, I'd throw my money on it. Again, there are things that they could be providing to me as a product manager for my fee that I pay to the network, tools and whatnot, that actually would be very useful, that we talk about on the podcast all the time. We talk about with Alex, the tools that service the community now just don't do. All the stuff in between teams, all the stuff at a strategy level, like none of the tools do that. They could have built, I mean, there's enough software development professionals that do CST. I'm like, I come across flippant with the CSTs, but there are a lot of experts with deep knowledge in that network that they could build a tool like this just with the money that falls between the cracks between them and their own teams and whatnot. They could build a really great tool to do this with integration with Jira, with integrations with whatever tool you use. Did I say Jira? Sorry, I didn't know if I said it, but that's not the route here.
When you have a market that's saturated and has pressure on it from the industry at large, where people are dumping on Agile to begin with, right? As has been the case lately. The trainers have a hard job trying to sell themselves.
Yeah.
And so collectively joining something like a union that you see from the perspective of legitimizing it. Everybody knows what PMI is, what they bring. And then the other side of it is the Agile network. But at the same time, is saying, well, it's only $1 a day. Look what you get for it, is what I'm seeing being advertised. You get access to a number of CSTs.
Well,
right? So they can help you for your own specific situations. You can ask them detailed questions. $1 a day is a good price for that. But I feel like they're missing the boat a little bit here. And that is a lot of these trainers, when you really dig deep, haven't really worked in Agile, like on a team, on teams of teams. They become trainers. And what they teach you is, again, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this. They're going to provide you with the book knowledge. Here's how you do things. Until you go to the real world and you go, wait, I can't apply that here because it doesn't work in the real world.
So what you just brought up, I wrote some notes of what I've heard from developers. And we sat down before the podcast. We kind of arranged my notes, and we do arranging of like the order in which we think it's important to talk about things, right? One of the things that you just brought up, I have heard, was this no true Scotsman type of like, oh, you can do Scrum, but no one ever really does Scrum. Your implementation of Scrum isn't properly working or whatever. And then you're like, well, you're not really doing Scrum. So to a lot of developers, it just sounds like the no true Scotsman argument where you're like, no matter what you say, I get to say, well, you haven't done that right. You know what I mean? Like I've done Scrum by the book. And at every workplace I've ever been, I try to move Scrum back towards the way it's written in the Scrum guide so there's no extra added anything.
Yeah.
And I always get the teams back to this place. But I've never joined a team that was using Scrum the way that I finagle Scrum to be like, nope, we're doing it right out of the book. We don't skip things. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's always productive conversations that come out of it. We're going to talk about that particular category of most developers. They've never worked with a product manager that knows what they're doing, with an organization that supports Scrum, with an organization that understands, like, the stakeholders have to be at the certain meetings that they have to be at and stuff like that. Yeah. And there's so many kind of do this or that or do this and don't do that type of things that there's so many developers that just have never seen it. It works. Trust me.
I think you're right. I think a lot of times, certainly I can rely on my own experience, or what I've seen is a lot of developers have heard of it, but also being part of Fragile Agile, a part of pseudo Scrum in the past, wherever they come from, especially those developers that are contractors, mainly from offshore contracting vendors. What they've seen from other companies makes them cynical, and they say, well, I hear what you're saying, but it never worked in my past. We tried to do that. Did you really try to do that? Right? So that's where I think I've seen a lot of people just come up with the guards up, right? When you say we should be doing this, we should be doing that. And there are symptoms you can see that people will be not vocal, not contributing, just going along, right? Because whatever, you're saying this, but I've never seen it work.
We did a whole podcast, Agile Doesn't Work Here, Arguing Agile 83.
Wow.
Agile Doesn't Work Here. And I feel that a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not this.
No, it isn't that. This is different.
I mean, Arguing Agile 83, like, we talked a lot about management hang-ups in 83. We talked about incentives, middle managers sabotaging things, business incentives, and the way that the business is organized, and kind of how things are set up, organizational fear of failure, that kind of stuff, egos, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what we're going to talk about today, like the hang-ups that developers will use. These are the arguing points that developers will use.
The frustrations they have.
Yeah.
Well, we're not saying they're doing this deliberately or anything like that with malice aforethought. This is genuine. Yeah. But at the same time, they haven't seen the environment where it can actually work, right? If they've been around a bit and they've seen that, and there are a couple of developers I know in the Tampa area that vocalize that themselves and say, look, this works, right? It didn't used to because we never did it right to begin with. So yeah, this is a different nuance on what we were talking about before.
Also, one of the things not on our list that I heard, they said that most people in the field now, they've never worked in Waterfall. So when you say something Waterfall, or when you compare something to Waterfall, it's meaningless to them because they've never worked in an organization with a project manager who like gives you the work breakdown and says you have to complete this
by this time.
Yeah, they've never worked in that. Everything's been relabeled with Agile terms their whole career. They don't know it's this project management, command and control mindset,
right?
Who's used new terminology. So all this is being assessed. All these failures are being assessed against Agile. right? And really, they're working in Scrum. So really, they're assessing the failures of Scrum and saying, well, all Scrum is Agile, but not all Agile is Scrum. So basically, all the problems are directed back
to Scrum or Agile.
To Agile.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. Some of the younger folks out there, they've never worked in Waterfall before. But now they're working in Scrum.
Labeled.
But are they really working in Scrum? Or is it simply Agile? What is Scrum or Fall?
So let's talk about complaint number 1. So,
Exhibit 1.
Yeah, let's talk about Exhibit A. I need to relabel. How can I relabel these to A quickly? I can't.
No, you can. I didn't even go to the bullets list and say
Google Docs is
next to it.
Oh no! What did I click? Control Z. That'll be the first thing the developer say. They'll say there's Scrum's got all these ceremonies, or they'll say Agile. Agile's got all these ceremonies. I gotta go to my daily stand-ups. Why do I gotta have a daily stand-up? I gotta do sprint plannings is just my tech lead telling me what to do anyway. I gotta do retrospectives, which is all us just sitting around and writing up a bunch of lists of the same things over and over again. Those are not Scrum problems or Agile problems. Like, those are just like organizational problems, and you have to find a better place to work. They will hear this, but they'll say shops like Google don't do any of this. They don't do any sprint plannings. They just have small teams that are self-contained, that have all the right people, all senior people, self-contained, talk directly to customers, and pitch their own projects. And they're the most successful company in the world, Brian. So you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get that all the time in my role, right? Because people will just say, why do we need all this stuff? This is too much overhead. Just leave me alone. I know what I have to do. You've shared the backlog with me. I'm just going to pop off the top of that stack. I'm going to go to the basement. I'll work on it. Don't bother me with all these meetings. Okay, but you're not learning what's needed. You're not learning how the need is changing. You're not talking to customers. So you've got people working on the same stuff under different guises. This idea of collaboration, right? And making sure that everyone owns collectively the output or outcome of a sprint. That is something that some people find difficult to accept, especially those that are not like new people. These people are tech leads or equivalent thereof, developers that have been in the game for a while. Mm-hmm. We know what's needed here, right? Let me go get this done. That's all I need to do. And when it comes to a review or a demo, we'll just throw it over to the product owner. They can do that.
Yeah.
I piss off customers when I open my mouth. Kind of, it's like, yeah, okay, but you need to be the person who talks to the customers. The customers need to be able to ask you questions, right? You need to get into the refinement where, by the way, I have customers in refinement, right? A lot of times that doesn't happen, but I do have that. And they can ask questions. Sure.
So it doesn't matter. They're not using my products now, but at some point they'll be in a sales pitch and they'll hear about my products. Anyway, I was at a customer visit one time that I just went along just to hang out, just to see, hey, I'm Brian. I'm a product manager for this thing or whatever. I'm not your product manager, but I'm here with we're peers. This is product manager Bob. And the product manager said, oh, I can't go to lunch. I got to stay here. I'm like, why? This is the only hour we have free. You get something to eat. You're going to be wiped out after lunch.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, this is my refinement time. And if I don't make it to refinement, then I can't trust them to have the stories that I prioritize at the top of I can't trust that they will be able to, the refinement done, to have those stories ready. And if the stories are not ready by sprint planning time, then either our sprint planning is going to run super long, or I'll have to make more time for sprint planning, or we won't be able, basically the work for the sprint won't be ready if I don't make it this refinement to help them, because I'm the guardrails that helps them stay on track.
Yeah.
And
when you say guardrails, I'm hearing I'm the bottleneck.
I said, then your whole team should be here at the customer then.
Doing the Gemba.
Every time you travel and go in front of the customer and hear their pain points, they should be in front of the customer. And he's like, oh, I don't know if I could do that. I'm like, yeah, because that's the agility that we're talking about.
Right.
Well, maybe your meetings would be shorter if your customers had built this empathy for the customer and really understood, like, oh, when we were at customer A, little Timmy said, I don't know why, like child labor, like
little Johnny.
She's like little
Johnny's graduated,
Johnny's graduating elementary school soon, and he said he's on H-1B visa, and that's a little topical 2025. We'll see how this ages in the future. If you were able in your sprint plannings to say, like, this is the functionality we want to do, we want to add this drop down that lets the customer get through process Y faster, and I want to do that because little Timmy said that getting through this process was terrible. We all thought that 18 clicks was easy enough, but little Timmy said that his little tiny fingers can't click that many times, and we got to make it 5 clicks or something. Those conversations can be shortcut, whereas otherwise you have to sell development on these things that you do every day on your development machine. You don't realize
That's right.
how painful they are to the customers because you never talk to the customers.
Oh, dude. So there's so much there, right? First of all, if the development team was directly interfacing with the customer and the customer has a pain point, then the development team could ask that question. Or the customer could say, well, this is so painful, I have to do 18 clicks. What is it that you're trying to actually achieve? And so it's no longer about like going back as a product person to your team and say, we need to have a drop down. That's just the how part,
Sure.
right? What are you trying to achieve? And developers can ask questions. What if?
Yeah.
What if you could do X? What if you could do Y? Yeah, and the pushback could be, well, that's too many. It's still too many key clicks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the table with some other solution, right? That is valuable. That's gold compared to going downstream and then saying, well, we need a drop down. Okay, well, we'll give you a drop down.
Yeah.
Then you take it back to the customer. The customer says there's too many values in the drop down. I get lost in there. Maybe it should have been a radio button. Who knows? It could have been a multi-combo box, whatever, right? So it's not about the how. It's about not only is it about the what they need, but also, more importantly, I think, is the why.
Yeah.
Why do you want to do this, right? Oh, well, because every time we go through this experience, it saves 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And we go through it 1,000 times a day.
Yeah.
That's why. So that's actually a pain point that we can align with, right?
Yeah.
Trying to solve it. So I think it's important for developers to interface with customers and be able to ask questions and learn what the real needs are, what the real pain points are. The brave ones will also push back sometimes, because it's not about just saying yes sir, no ma'am, right? Or sometimes you say you want that, but wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to deal with any of that, and we could just give you a sub page over here, or whatever the situation might be. So sometimes it's easier for the developers to simply ask the right questions, say no in the right way, or just say, well, okay, but what about this instead of just plain blank saying no. Much, much quicker. Having the intermediary as a product person, to me, that now you've introduced yourself as a product person as the bottleneck. Because when a dev asks an interesting question, you're going to go, I don't know. Let me get back to you on that. Okay, wait. Right?
Right.
You've introduced waste right here.
Right. Somebody asked me recently, can I take this site and make it dark mode? And I said, theoretically, it should be easy to implement because it's just a CSS. But let me take that to the dev team and ask them, because if the site is written in a way where all the CSS selectors are easily flipped, then no problem. I was like, but if all that stuff's hard-coded, then it's going to be a huge issue. If the back-end code is a mess and they never implemented it like that in the first place, I wouldn't know as a product manager. I wouldn't know that they didn't take a lot of diligence to implement this control, or they just like grab something off the shelf that they don't have a lot of control over just to kind of move things along. I wouldn't know. So I had to check with the development team. A better thing to do would have been to invite like my tech lead or my lead developer rep from the team to that meeting where I was talking with the stakeholders, so that we could have just answered the question right away and be like, no, all of our stuff is done where we could hook up light dark mode. We just never implemented mode selector, the little box to select light or dark. Super easy. 10 minutes.
Or no, this is heavy refactoring.
And then I could just tell the stakeholder right there, like, these are the things I have in my roadmap and ahead of that, and they're all way more important than that. And I could just level set right there on a call. Look, I got a lot of more important stuff to do. I want to get there eventually. Can this wait a quarter? And then the business person probably would be like, all that stuff's more important. It can wait a quarter, whatever. But I am leading to a place where eventually we get to light mode, dark mode. I probably would ask some more questions.
I think the important thing is you're having those trade-off discussions earlier with the right people.
I think the important point here is developers complaining there's too many meetings because we've implemented Scrum, but you're just implementing like Scrum out of the box and standing up all the meetings just to have all the meetings. This is one of those shuhari things. If you've come from like chaos development or no process at all, and you set up Scrum out of the box, sure, it might be annoying for a while you're saying, no, you have to have a retro and a sprint demo and whatever. And you're like, I don't understand what is even in a sprint. How do I even get users? That stuff can be scary. But anybody complaining about meeting overload, any developer complaining about meeting overload, try this. Don't have any of these meetings that a retrospective aside, don't have any of these meetings that a customer's not part of. Okay. You don't want a daily stand-up? Fine. Don't have a daily stand-up. Don't have a daily stand-up as long as when someone says they're stuck on something, you're going on a Slack and having like an impromptu huddle. If you're getting together impromptu when things happen, if you're basically doing like the pull version of a stand-up rather than like a daily cadence just on a set schedule, it happens come rain or shine. Like if When somebody picks something up and opens up a repo they've never been in for the first time, they get another developer to look over their shoulder. When you want to do a PR, you say right there, hey, I need a PR. I need someone to look over my shoulder and do a PR. You get someone on a call right there. You know what I mean? If that's your version, I agree with you. You probably don't need a daily stand-up. But yeah.
I think at the backbone of that, it was really just having sound working agreements, because if somebody's stuck on something, as a team, you could decide. If anybody's stuck on anything for, let's say, more than an hour, put something in Slack or whatever you're using, right, to collaborate. And somebody could help you. Wait till the next morning because you're doing it by the book, right, and then raise it at the daily stand-up. Yeah, there's a lot there.
The topic that we're talking about is like, well, we're going to have all these meetings and they're all one size fits all. Like the Scrum Guide says we have to have them all, and they're a waste of my time, right? Well, if you're finding meetings are a waste of your time and you're not using the retro to either correct the meetings or to bring the customer into the ones that aren't useful, so that thereby making them useful, or something else. If you're in a bad working environment and there's no way of improving it, there's one piece of advice on the podcast we always give.
Keep that resume updated. Most of the time, though, when people complain about having too many meetings or meeting overload, they say, well, we already have all these other meetings. We have collaboration calls, etc. And then we have these Scrum meetings. And when you dig down deep enough, you'll find that if they did the things right during the Scrum meetings anyway, the other meetings basically are superfluous.
Why are you having all these other, like...
you don't need them, because we've always had them.
I've seen that too, where I've been in organizations where they have like all engineering... like they have the team stand up, and then all the engineers together have a different stand up. Why would you do that? If you're going to the Agile principle of each team creates a process that works the best for the team, that could be this whole category. It's like, hey, you know what? Use Scrum, but you know what? If you don't want to use Scrum, if you want to use Kanban, if you want to use whatever, if you don't want to use any process at all, do whatever works for your team. Every team should have their own processes that's tailored to fit the team, by the team, for the team. And if that's seen as extreme in your workplace, you have problems with your workplace. We've taken Scrum completely out of the equation at this point.
Yeah.
Because I have teams that use Kanban well, right? And all the events and everything are on demand. We have a daily stand-up. Sometimes we do it async. Sometimes we don't. Like if everyone's just kind of clicking and is on task and not unblocked and whatever, just pulling the top item, we just say, hey, we're working, everything's fine, and that's it. I see a lot of people say this. We've suggested a few things. Use the process that works for you. Use the meetings that work for you. If the meetings aren't productive, bring it up in your retro. Make the meetings productive. If customers aren't in there and they're supposed to be in there, you get the customers in there. And if you can't do any of that, keep that resume updated.
A lot of people stay in the shoe stage for a long, long time. People don't realize that. That's actually something you can just quickly jump out of.
Well, the student has to want to improve
That's
in order
absolutely
to improve
right.
in the shoe stage.
Yeah.
So meeting overload, always going to be the first thing everyone throws out. The next thing people are going to throw out is Agile, quote Agile. They usually bring up Scrum when they say Agile. Agile is just micromanagement disguised with another word. Or typical project management disguised as what we would call Waterfall. Yeah. The complaints area that you'll hear is that daily stand-up is a status meeting, right? Nothing ever changes after retrospective. We say the same problems over and over again, and nothing ever gets resolved. You're not allowed to take anything out of a sprint. And if you're Scrum, you're not allowed to take anything out of it. Management will tell you what's in the sprint and then keep adding stuff to the sprint. As the sprint goes on, they'll keep adding stuff without taking stuff out.
The work in the sprint is up to the team. So if they feel like something can't be done or needs to be moved out, they should move it out. They should be perfectly empowered to do that. But a lot of shops, they're not.
Real quick over, it's like the other thing that aggravates me about this category, not micromanagement, well, sort of micromanagement, but that goes hand in hand with this category. I think we're going to talk about this later, is the re-segmentation of the market, like what PMI is reacting to. PMI is reacting to the re-segmenting of the project management market to pull the agile stuff out and be like, well, we don't need project management. In whole, we don't need it.
Yeah.
We can just work directly with customers, work back and forth. So basically the customer has their own little delivery team, and we'll just deliver software on a regular cadence. You pick what the highest priority thing is on the cadence, and then at a certain cadence, you will be getting finished working quality software, right? There was a re-segmentation of the old project management software development that sort of pulled this little piece of software development out of project management and said, oh, we're agile now. And then product management sort of was born in parallel out of the GM role of an organization that was dedicated to like a single suite of software or whatever. And then at some point, the product management side of the house said like, oh, we were never agile. We never did any of these agile things. We never followed any of these agile principles. And they're trying to rebrand themselves as like, oh, we always were doing something. It was never agile transformation that we were doing to make product work. It was always a product operating model transformation. It bugs me because there's a lot of stuff in here. It's this micromanagement disguise category that also can co-opt and destroy good product management practices. So like management throwing stuff into your sprint when the sprint is already kicked off, which basically means management is not letting you keep a prioritized backlog for the team to pull the top off of and say, oh, these things are the priority. We're going to take as many as we think we can take and do in a sprint. And then boom, that becomes our sprint. Super clean cut and easy way of managing your work. But when you're just relabeling terms, like that practice is kind of nuanced. And it took me a second to explain the prioritization of an ordered backlog and pulling it in and creating a sprint from it. That's not going to make its way into the nomenclature of the micromanaging management culture. So some of product management is not possible in this type of culture.
That's a culture where you're instilling this idea that whatever I say right now is important. Oh, and 10 minutes later I can come back to you and say, well, that's changed, so deal with it. Because they will turn that around at the team when the team says, we're already sprinting, right? And it's okay if you want to change things, but you're adding something, take something equivalent out. It's like, you're agile, figure it out. So they'll use that against you. You're agile. So I can come to you anytime and I can change what you're working on and you shall not complain because you're agile, right? And they miss the point at that stage because that whole opportunity cost discussion that we have. Yeah, I'll bring this in, but at what cost?
I like that this bald-faced micromanagement, like they're doing that while also setting inflexible milestone deadlines.
Sure.
And then saying, like, you have to have this done by this date. And I'm like, but that date falls in the middle of the sprints. I don't care. Get it done. Look, these incompatible worlds. Someone who's just in the shoe phase of shoe hurry, just trying to learn. There's no way. I can't imagine how you learn with this kind of stuff layered over the top of like, whoa, we're agile, but we have deadlines. We're agile, but we don't get to take stuff out of the sprint. Oh, we're agile, but we don't get to choose from the top of the backlog. There's so much in here that like I understand what I started the podcast being like, these points are ridiculous. As we talk through them, I'm like, these points are completely valid.
They are totally valid. And yeah, I mean, to your point, if you're agile, but, right? This is exactly why team members basically become jaded after a while and say, we're supposed to be agile, but really are
or there's no such thing as agile. Yeah.
Or it doesn't work here. That's the other thing, right? Maybe agile may work in your organization, but it doesn't work here because we tried it.
Well, I mean,
did you really try it?
How many conversations about like we need more velocity? Like how many of those until you just believe agile doesn't work anywhere? I can only imagine the developer who works at, let's say you work at a fintech or you work in finance or whatever, and you work at one place for 3 years, another place for 5 years, another place. Every place is going to be using agile terminology. Going to be doing sprints, this kind of stuff, and they're all going to have these problems.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And I think we've talked about this on other podcasts. I mean, part of the rationale is people that are making these decisions, like the senior level managers, didn't grow up in an agile way.
Sure.
Or agile ways of working. So that's what they know. It's been successful for them, and they're going to continue doing it that way.
Yeah.
And part of that also is we talk about training teams, but we don't really often talk about training leadership.
Yep.
Right. And that's where it starts often.
Potty training leadership.
Well, they need the training wheels on longer teams.
So like another one that we don't normally talk about on the podcast, which I think is a neat category, and we're going to take 2 seconds to talk about it. Misalignment, like Agile/Scrum. Mainly this is leveled at Scrum. So let's just say Scrum. Scrum is misaligned with creative work. They'll say like software development is creative work. And with all your 2-week deadlines and your time boxes and whatnot, like I'll give you an example. I guess I should finish what I was saying. With your 2-week deadlines and your time boxes and your everything has to be known to be pointed or whatever, things like doesn't lend itself to being creative. That's what they'll say. And I'll give you an example just to put a period at the end of this super long running sentence. I've worked on a number of teams where I've heard a developer say, I don't know how long this is going to take, so I can't guarantee it'll be done in 2 weeks. Or they'll say, we could deliver a vertical slice of functionality that's working, but that will not solve the user's entire problem. So what is the point of delivering a slice until the entire pie can be delivered to the user? What's the point of delivering a slice? There's no point in that. So why put this like unnatural 2-week, bookend on the functionality instead of just like taking as much time as it needs to deliver it. So this is the being creative And I mean, you could say like you could also say being creative in like exploratory tasks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like refactoring things or figuring out new technologies to work in, that kind of stuff could go under this banner as well. As like, well, they don't fit in 2 week sprints.
A lot of times when people say, "What's the point?" We have to actually deliver everything because this little potentially shippable increment isn't usable in production. So why even release it, right? Well, let's hang on to it and we'll release these 5-6 features together, whatever stories, whatever you may have. Where they're missing the point on this is you need that feedback, right? So if you wait months and then get feedback, you'll have to pivot very hard as opposed to pivoting quickly for that little micro piece of the functionality. So that's actually very key. Yeah, but it's not ready. It doesn't have to be ready. Just show them where you're heading. They'll tell you if you're heading in the right direction or not. And so that's one of the things that I always use with teams. Yeah, it's not ready. That's fine. Sometimes they'll say, well, we can't deploy it to stage because it needs these 6 other features to go with it. It's like, what would happen if you did deploy it without the other 5 or 6, right? What would happen? Not in production, right? Can you show it? Yeah, but it won't work for all of these other things. Great. But does it do what it's supposed to do?
Yeah.
And can we get some feedback on it? So I think that mindset of getting rapid feedback, that needs to be instilled in these teams.
This is a great one that you'll also hear from non-developers, but in technical functions like data science and stuff like that. They'll say innovation may not happen through iteration. We may need to work on something for a long period of time, like delve into building a complicated data model or some like a deep refactor task. If we're going to go refactor, like I talked in the podcast before about going through a PHP 5 to 7 upgrade or whatever. That upgrade took a really long time. Now, in the end, we chunked it up by module, and it's a bad example because I did iterate through that upgrade, module by module, basically.
Yeah.
But we did hold on to all of the finished pieces, all of the builds and demos that we did. We held on to those in a lower environment, and we didn't push to a upper environment until all of them were done. But, it's the case that big leaps are not done iteratively, which is kind of the case being made here. Like, the big innovation is done by just letting me go off in a corner and work forever. Like, I don't know about that.
I think the big innovations come through micro discoveries and steering in the right direction. You may change and you may have lots of changes on the way in direction, but if you wait and don't get those frequently, I don't know how often you're going to have those big lucky breaks, really.
Yeah, another thing that developers will talk about will be the interruption of the flow state. You need to give me time to be in flow. Or what do they call it in a social network, like wired in? He's wired in. Don't touch him. He's wired in. Don't disturb him. Okay. I was just pointing out earlier, like sometimes we won't do daily stand-up because people know what they're working on. And like everyone's got Slack.
Right.
Slack is a asynchronous tool. So like if you got notifications and all that stuff turned on, like turn all that stuff off. You go check the channels when you're ready to check the channels. Yeah. It's just like your email and your phone and everything else. Like, do you let all that stuff interrupt you every single time it beeps every single day, all day? I would guess you don't get anything done if you do.
Sure.
I'm sure people have the notifications on. They might hear a ding and they just like have the self-discipline not to check it. But I turn everything off because, again, like I'm a 90s kid. So like I learned that like you go check your email when you want to check your email.
Don't let it check you.
You got mail. Can I find that sound online?
Oh, I'm sure you can. It's really just thinking about how you're working as a team rather than individual, right? Because a bunch of individuals do not make a team. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is this. Let's say you have 6 people on your team. Do you have a team of 6 people or do you have 6 teams of a person each? Right? And I've seen that, especially in strong, like teams that have strong personalities, right? Where people say, well, I've been a developer for 15 years and I know what I'm doing. You give me what needs to be done. I'll give you the best quality work ever. Just leave me alone for 10 days.
Yeah.
I worry about those people.
Well, I have to say, man, this is not the podcast of debunking any of these. And I'm also not trying to come down harsh on any of these points. But I do have to say, why so few developers have adopted XP? Like 20 plus years after XP was a thing. And they still resist working together because coding with somebody else is scary. To have somebody look at the code that you're writing over your shoulder, that's so scary. So
people are insecure about it and for the wrong reason.
I make Python work, and I think the code is pretty fantastic for my own usage. You know what I mean? But it's scary. The point I'm trying to make here is why is there not more of that teaming, that journeyman, apprentice, kind of master, journeyman, apprentice type of, you know what I mean? Like your journeyman can kind of do everything on their own, but your apprentices need to peer with someone, and then the master kind of helps all people at all skill levels. Like why there's not more of that, why that particular movement did not become the standard, which is still not the standard today. The standard today is a junior developer who just figures it out and gets thrown into the fire and gets yelled at a bunch. And, that now, like in the next 10 years, Siri, set a reminder for 10 years. The next 10 years, it's going to be even worse because everyone's going to be copying spaghetti code from ChatGPT. And, oh, boy.
Well, we do need to move on, but I'll say this one last thing on why that model didn't take off. And that's because the barrier to entry became much lower for people.
I thought you were going to say because management hates you.
Management does hate you, but the barrier to entry went away from show us what you do now. Doesn't matter how bad it is, and we'll help you get better.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm thinking in my mind the analogy with martial arts. When you go in, and you're nobody when you go in, you get beat up all the time, but they teach you. They teach you stances. They teach you how to roll, how to fall and roll, all of that stuff. And you get better over time, right? We don't have that today because to come in, you don't need to show that initiative. All you need to show, flash, is some kind of certification. Says, hey, I'm qualified.
Developers don't have that problem, though. They basically just don't need to show any... I don't even know what they show. Do they show anything?
They show the latest languages and skills on their resume, but really you can't tell if they have it or not.
Well, that's not great. Can we? Well, I thought about something also while we were talking. Can we add to the working agreement institutions? Can we add a little star onto that and say and Eric Schmidt, because that was Eric on the Eric Schmidt podcast. That was his view. He's like, oh, these developers and they never do what I want. You know what I'm saying? But I feel like the Eric Schmidts of the world would be like 2 developers in one chair. Nobody can live at that speed. It's not efficient.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get me somebody from India.
Right. And then we'll get them to work Saturdays. That's the latest thing too, by the way. Yeah.
So the other thing, if anybody to put a cap on this category, because we've rambled for too long, Scrum should be the thing that creative teams, like if your Scrum was a 3-day Scrum, and you had no backlog, you just picked the top item up, actually, if your Scrum didn't have a time box, you had a time box of however long the top item did. I'm describing Kanban. Seriously, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And you said, I'm going to work on the top thing. When I'm done, I trigger a sprint demo. I'm going to demo to the user, get the user on phone, knock it out, and then boom, I go right into the next planning, pick up the next thing. That's Kanban, right? Like a lot of these things would go away. You wouldn't claim that, I can't be creative and use this. You absolutely can be using Scrum and be creative at the same time and eat all your cake and pizza at 7 a.m.
You're absolutely right. But most development teams that say they're doing Kanban aren't actually doing Kanban. They're doing hand-on. So they're not really doing things like respecting WIP. So we keep starting, right? Yeah. And we don't finish. But if you are truly doing that, as you mentioned, establishing a flow where it's a pull system, right? You pull the highest priority item, you work on it and push it off to the right, pull the next one. But as soon as that item's finished, get feedback, do a demo right away. There's not a designated demo day, right? As there is in Scrum.
Right.
If you're truly doing that, you're doing the best you can to satisfy the customer.
The other thing that I will point out, right before I move on to this category, we did a whole podcast on the term MVP. And I feel that a lot of developers saying that Scrum can't be used for creative work or Agile, whatever, doesn't lend itself to creativity in the development process or through the development process. I would expect that part of the watering down or co-opting of the term MVP plays into this, meaning... And also with the product operating model, I see that we're going to probably drift even further. If you go back and you read the Eric Ries Lean Startup terminology for MVP, or go listen to our podcast on MVP, MVP is just the smallest amount you can do to validate an idea against the market, whether it's good or not. And your development team should be the ones doing that validation. So is it development team plus product manager? Is it the designer plus the development team? Is it the designer? It doesn't matter. Your development team should be involved in those experiments that are happening. This is why the double diamond, the discovery delivery diamond, that drives me insane every time I see it, because it seems like an end-to-end process where certain people pick it up or whatever. And I'm sure that's what most people see it, and their mode one thinking brain is like, oh, I had my designer the step 1 and I had my developers the step 2. That's not what it's supposed to be.
Correct.
So if you're saying, oh, the creative work's not put on my plate, they just hand the code at me and they say, go monkey code this. first of all, keep that resume updated because you've been cut out of all the fun work. You're not the fun stuff developer. Right. You're the drudgery
trying to fix somebody else's code all the time.
And also, if you're in that position, you're the people that the Eric Schmidt of the world is trying to put out of business, spending billions and billions of dollars on ChatGPT. That's not what development's supposed to be. That's not what product management is supposed to be. You're all supposed to do this MVP, testing an idea. And an idea could be, if we tweak some widget or format or something on the website, then people will find it easy to use. But an idea could be a whole new idea for an app, stand something up. Most developers' MVP experience is put out some crappy code that falls over as soon as it gets a load or as soon as a bug hits or something like that. Path through the code that we didn't expect gets hit, and then everything fails and the developer's got to get up in the middle of the night. That is not an MVP. That is garbage code.
I'm laughing because most of the time when people say MVP, they hide behind the term. When things fall apart and they just go, well, it's MVP, right? No, because then they'll try and say, well, we get that. We didn't do that yet because we'll do it later, or we'll fix it later. And later doesn't happen.
Never comes. Yeah. Or later goes to the bottom of the backlog, which eventually goes away.
Exactly. Yeah. So you still have crap out there.
Yeah. Yes, you do.
It's just not called MVP anymore because it's become part and parcel of the product.
And Lord help you the moment that you start getting paid money for that crap, because that means it's permanent crap.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then you're living in a house built on a foundation of crap.
The crapification of product.
Well, we talked a lot about product management. I guess it's time to talk about product management for real. If you're doing this story point theater and you're doing this number of hours per story, or you're doing any kind of funkiness about estimation, if you're doing backflips to do estimation, you're living in this world. It's like you're playing some politics probably about, like, you say it's a 5 and then your manager comes in and is like, ooh, a 5? Really? I had a manager one time who he would sit in sprint planning, and no matter what anyone's estimate was, we estimated in hours back then. This is years ago. And whatever anyone was at, I think it'll take 12 hours to do that, and the development manager will go, ooh. He would use that, he'd suck in the air, and his voice would go real high. 12 hours? Oh, 12. No matter what you said, you could have been like, it'll take 15 minutes. He'd go, ooh, 15 minutes.
I had a simple response to that.
Just double all your estimates?
Well, that's what the teams do. They weaponize it. But no, I would just say, well, how long do you think it should take? So if you say 12, it's I think it's more like 4 hours. So, great, done. We'll assign it to you. 4 hours it is. You own it, right?
Oh, no.
You're doing the work.
If we're using Scrum, the sprint planning should be a quick, like, it should be the what, and then the how. It should be like the what, here's all of what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then here's some points on it if we haven't done, or here's some hours, or just a WAG estimate, right? And then in detail work, we'll do all the detail work. So he'd be in the what part of the meeting when we're assigning an initial, like, even t-shirt size, a small, medium, large, whatever. Oh, that's a large. Really, a large? I think it's a small. He'd be like, why do you think it's this? What do you got to do? No, you got to do this. And then he would go immediately into, like, he'd transition to the solutioning. So that story could be a different podcast. Point I'm trying to make with this one is getting beat down about estimates, no matter if they're story points or hours or t-shirt sizes or really whatever else, or another reason that most developers are like, they have bad experiences with this.
Sure. And that's what leads to overestimation and all of that, because they want to protect themselves too.
Another thing we talked about is the business pressure. So sometimes this comes from the product manager. Sometimes this comes from managers, if you don't have a product manager, whatever. But we already talked about just shoving more work into the sprint and not taking anything out. But we didn't talk about turning story point 8s into story point 3s by just putting out a bunch of code that is going to need to be refactored later. Basically creating technical debt that's never going to get paid off.
Right. Yeah, this is definitely fragile agile, where the culture makes the team want to say, sure, that's a 3-point. We'll get it out there. It's crappy code. We'll fix it later. Yeah. That's just terrible, because later may never come. And it may never come for a very bad reason. That is, the customer is so disappointed with what they see. They don't want you to fix anything. They're just leaving you. That happens.
A gripe that the developers rightfully will bring up is that, like, for example, whenever they point out stuff in a retro, like, it's impossible to change things organizationally. Basically, the organization will not allow the teams to make changes outside of their team. I was in an organization once where it was like, what book is this? I almost want to say it was Who Moved My Cheese. It was too early for books like Extreme Ownership and stuff like that, about, like, there's always something you can do. You know what I mean? Stop blaming other people for, like, things that you can't control, and just look to your team to do what you can control on your team. And I'm like, yeah, but the problems are not in our team. The problems are all these handoffs of the team. Like the problems are all the processes, the inter-team process.
So it's sort of the organizational construct. And the teams have absolutely no say in that, right? But at the same time, every team that is delivering a solution jointly is being blamed for their individual portion. If you fix all of those things, it will still not be a success because the org structure isn't aligned the right way.
See our podcast on Deming, talk about the system, but this is the illusion. I penned, when I wrote this one down, I wrote it down as the illusion of self-organization, self-management. I don't know what they call it now in the Scrum, but the idea that like your team really has no say in what they take into sprint planning, no say in team composition, management to take people on and off your team whenever they want, shuffle teams around whenever they want, no say in the work methods, the agile principle of your team should be in control of like the methods and processes and stuff like that. And if you don't have any of that stuff, like, you're not being agile at all, you got this command and control going on. So like if you're in command and control, that's your problem. You need to find a non-command and control place to work.
Companies who really force this way of working will say, that's the best way under the guise of standardization, because it makes it easy for them to gauge and assess teams, individuals even, if everything's standardized. Unfortunately, then that leads very quickly to measuring teams across each other. They'll say, well, the PMO has to have standards so they can support you. The reality is they're actually your roadblocks right there, because the team could figure out a way around the org structure. Ultimately, you really need to redesign the org, right? But again, the teams have no sway in this matter whatsoever. Not many people do. So org structures, the teams cannot get out of their own way individually as teams to deliver successfully because they're bound and hindered by the way the organization is structured. So org design is a big part of the equation here, and it largely is ignored because people just say, well, I can't move City Hall. I'm just going to do what I do.
And the other thing that will intersect with this is if you read any developer forums about Scrum Masters, you will see almost 100% negative interactions because the Scrum Masters they have on their teams, and it's not surprising that they're in these command and control centric organizations who have hired Scrum Masters. I don't really know why these command and controls organizations have Scrum Masters in the first place. I do know it's because the PMI stuff is not in vogue anymore. The Scrum Master stuff is in vogue, but they need someone to be their eyes and ears.
Yes. They're spies.
And a PMP certified project manager is just very expensive compared to a Scrum Master. So we're going to get one of these people and throw them on the team.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, a lot of the companies are trying to save money. Onshore person, a PMP, who's been a project manager for a while, you tell them to be a Scrum Master. They find it hard to fulfill the duties of a Scrum Master because they've been successful as a project manager, largely following the command and control methodology. Here's your work breakdown structure, Brian. Get this done by next Thursday.
That's right.
They've never done the work ever. They don't know if it can be even done by Thursday. They're telling you what to do, when to do it by. And then suddenly you're saying, well, we don't really want project managers anymore because we're supposed to be agile, in double quotes. So we will just simply relabel these people as Scrum Masters. They're going to continue doing what they did before. The other part of it is they'll say, okay, these people are expensive, so we'll let them go. And for one of those people who we let go, we can get maybe 2, potentially even 3 Scrum Masters from offshore. Lo and behold, you get Scrum Masters from offshore that are, let's just say, not very well mature in their craft. So these people are what I call textbook Scrum Masters. They will still follow the 3 questions. They will do all of those things by the book. They won't really protect the team. They won't really do the things they should be doing. So the contrasting side of it is interesting because I've just recently seen that work very well where the team actually says, we didn't like the old Scrum Master, but we like this new Scrum Master. And the reason is that Scrum Master is asking all the right questions. They're sharing the product roadmap with us. We didn't even know where that is. We don't know if we're going to be here a quarter from now. But now we can see on the roadmap, right? If we're going to be here or not. We can be a part of the discussion now. So I've seen teams turn around and say, this is great. And they get behind that Scrum Master. These Scrum Masters that are doing the textbook methodology, if they're late 5 minutes, the team just sits and waits. Right? As opposed to the other Scrum Master who, well, after all, Scrum Masters are optional for the daily sync. But if they don't show up, the team gets on with it. That shows that the Scrum Masters had a hand to play in instilling the culture of self-organization. So that goes a long way towards getting the team on board. But then they get stuck at that whole org design obstacle right there.
Well, kind of the last point we'll talk about, and this one will be quick, I swear, that I will hear is Scrum/Agile, they'll say Agile, doesn't handle any dependencies, anything that crosses team boundaries. It doesn't handle it.
Yeah.
So chaos breaks out when anything has to cross teams.
All the marbles fall out of the bag.
And this is especially worse in regulated industries, banks, stuff like that, or more old school type of industries where cross-team dependencies are a normal thing. And people who make arguments about this stuff will hold Google up to be like, look, Google doesn't have whatever. First of all, Google does have Agile coaches. So a lot of people are just saying stuff because they think that Google does or doesn't without investigating.
Yeah.
Putting that to the side for a second, cross-team work, from what I've heard from people that have worked at Google, is a nightmare. Teams own little systems, and in order to figure out how to interact with all the systems you need to produce a functioning application at the end of it is an absolute nightmare. With their web of software and to their web of interconnected software products, to make matters worse, in order to get promoted at Google, like taking something that is existing and just renaming it and putting it in a different place and changing the UI slightly is like a well-known thing to get your name and application in like the catalog, whatever it is that Google has, it like lets you know, like, oh, congratulations to this person, they came up with this new product. So like they'll say Scrum doesn't handle dependencies well and therefore is like not good. You know, doing anything across teams is not handled well. Like scaling, there's so many different scaling methodologies that have cropped up to try to solve this problem, and they all kind of miss the point a little bit and miss the mark a little bit.
Yeah.
And they'll use that to kind of accuse. I mean,
again, it's just the fundamentals gone bad or not done.
Let's stick to Scrum because I already have an arguing point for this one with Agile, which is, why is your organization so big in the first place?
Well, yeah.
You didn't respond. You didn't respond to say, like, who can talk to each other on a regular basis? And if you can't, I need to separate hierarchy, reporting structure, like the hiring structure, software structures. All that needs to be separated. If coordinating is so difficult, someone needs to fix that by like building a wall between. I'm not saying build silos with that 150 person Dunbar number.
Yeah,
you need to say, like, this is about the max my system can be, and like this is like the original Jeffrey Bezos at Amazon. Sorry, I can't not do Jeffrey Bezos. Sorry, Curtis. Why he was like, don't talk to other teams, talk to their APIs. They should be self-documented, and they should be clear enough. And if they're not clear, open a bug on the API that says you need to make, on the documentation of the API that says you need to make this more clear. And like that would be the way, you know. And then if an API doesn't do what you need, now you've got a product manager to product manager problem, which is clearly like it's just a stakeholder approaching. So there are ways to deal with this where you segment the organization and you divide, and you segment and divide, and you'll say, well, doesn't that lead to a incomprehensible mess of web of, or yeah, over time, it does.
It sure does, unless it's constantly being refactored as an org design, right? Not a lot of organizations do this
because it's hard.
It's hard. It is hard. It requires commitment from up on high. And oftentimes they do not like change. They want this feeling of constancy, right? This is what we have. This is how we work. The reality on the ground is we need to change all that stuff up. We need to change the way we work.
I'm glad that we're ending this podcast talking about management. We should be talking about leadership, but we're ending the podcast talking about management, because if you work at a place where you have any of the problems that we outlined, go listen to our Deming podcast and listen to the whole thing. Trust me, it's 2 hours well spent of your life.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
Because Deming says only management can change the system, and 94% of the problems in a workplace can be attributed to the system.
Yes.
Which only management can solve, and only 6% to the people.
That's a really good investment of your time. So go watch that podcast and keep that resume updated, and let us know down below what your thoughts are on this podcast, plus topics as suggestions for other podcasts. And don't forget to like and subscribe.